There is a version of becoming a millionaire that most people have in their heads. A high-paying career in law or medicine or finance. A tech startup that takes off. A property bought in Sydney in 1998 for $300,000 that's now worth $1.8 million. Some combination of luck, timing, and income that puts certain people in a position most could never access. That version exists, but it is not the most common version. The most common version is quieter, slower, and far more available than most people realise. It is the teacher in her 40s who has been salary sacrificing into super for 15 years. The tradesman who bought a modest investment property in his 30s and kept his expenses low. The couple on combined incomes of $140,000 who automated their investments a decade ago and never touched them. These are the Australians quietly crossing the $1 million mark without anyone noticing and without ever earning the kind of salary that would make it seem obvious. Today I want to break down exactly how they're doing it, because the mechanics are not complicated. They are just underappreciated. The first thing to understand is that $1 million in net worth is not the same as $1 million in cash. For most Australians who get there without exceptional incomes, the million is spread across a few different buckets. Superannuation is almost always the largest. Owner-occupied property equity is often the second. A modest investment portfolio outside super is sometimes the third. When you add those together for a couple in their late 50s who have been reasonably disciplined over a working life, $1 million in combined net worth is actually not that unusual. What is less common is people consciously building toward it rather than stumbling into it. The single most powerful mechanism available to ordinary Australians is one most people dramatically underuse. Superannuation combined with salary sacrifice. Here is the arithmetic. The compulsory employer contribution is currently 11.5% of salary. On a $90,000 salary, that's $10,350 going into super each year. Over a 35-year career from age 30 to 65, with a 7% average annual return, that compulsory contribution alone produces a super balance of around $1.4 million. Not from a high salary, not from extraordinary investment skill, from the default setting of the Australian superannuation system. Now add salary sacrifice on top. If that same person's salary sacrifices an additional $10,000 a year into super, taking their total concessional contributions toward the $30,000 annual cap, their balance at 65 grows to somewhere around $2.1 million under the same assumptions. The salary sacrifice contributions are taxed at 15% going in rather than their marginal rate of 32.5%. That tax saving alone, compounded over 35 years, is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional retirement wealth. Most Australians on ordinary incomes never set up a salary sacrifice arrangement. They leave the decision on the table their entire career without realising it. The ones who do become quietly wealthy almost without trying. The second mechanism is what happens when you buy an average home and stay in it. Australia's property market has delivered extraordinary long-run returns, particularly in the major capital cities. The median Sydney house price in 1990 was around $190,000. Today it's over $1.1 million. Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth have followed similar trajectories with different timing. An ordinary Australian who bought a median-priced home in a major capital in the 1990s or early 2000s and simply held it has seen equity growth that dwarfs what most investment portfolios produced over the same period. The key word is held. The wealth doesn't materialise from buying and selling. It comes from buying, holding through downturns, and allowing decades of price growth and mortgage paydown to build equity silently in the background. The plumber who bought a house in Blacktown in 2003 for $320,000 isn't wealthy because he's financially sophisticated. He's wealthy because he bought something real with limited supply in a growing city and didn't panic when the market dipped. This is not a strategy most first home buyers can replicate today given entry prices, but it illustrates the compounding principle that applies to every asset class. Time in the market, rather than timing the market, is the variable that most reliably produces wealth for people without exceptional incomes. The third mechanism is low-cost index investing outside superannuation, and it is the one that has become most accessible to ordinary Australians in the last decade. Exchange-traded funds have removed almost every barrier that once existed to investment portfolio building. VAS gives you the entire ASX 300 for a management fee of 0.07% per year. VGS gives you over 1,500 global companies for 0.18%. You can buy both through any Australian brokerage account with $500 and add to them regularly with no expertise required. The Australians using these tools consistently, investing $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 a month without interruption across market cycles, are building portfolios that look remarkably significant after 15 or 20 years. On $1,500 a month invested into a diversified portfolio, averaging 8% annual return, you accumulate around $330,000 after 10 years. After 15 years, it's around $520,000. After 20 years, over $880,000. This is not a high-income strategy. $1,500 a month is achievable for many Australian households earning combined incomes in the $100,000 to $150,000 range if spending is managed deliberately. And when you add that outside super portfolio to a growing super balance, the combined picture starts to look like real wealth. The fourth mechanism is the franking credit system, which is one of the most underappreciated financial advantages Australia offers ordinary investors. When an Australian company pays a fully franked dividend, it attaches a tax credit equal to the corporate tax already paid on those profits. For a low or middle income investor, those franking credits often result in a tax refund rather than an additional tax bill. Someone earning $60,000 a year who receives $5,000 in fully franked dividends might receive most or all of the attached franking credits back as a cash refund at tax time. This effectively boosts the real yield on Australian shares above the headline rate, and for investors sitting in lower tax brackets, it's a genuinely meaningful advantage that the rest of the world simply doesn't have access to. The fifth mechanism is the one nobody talks about at dinner parties: controlled spending. This sounds obvious to the point of being patronising, but the data is unambiguous. The strongest predictor of wealth accumulation at any income level is not investment returns or asset selection or market timing. It is the gap between income and expenditure. The wider that gap and the more consistently it is directed into appreciating assets, the more reliably wealth accumulates. The Australians who become millionaires on ordinary salaries are not living in deprivation. They are not driving 20-year-old cars and eating rice and beans, but they have made a deliberate choice, often an unconscious one that became habitual, to spend meaningfully less than their income allows. They drive reasonable cars rather than status vehicles. They holiday in Queensland rather than Europe every year. They eat out twice a week rather than 5 times. The cumulative difference between their spending and their peers' spending, directed into super and an investment portfolio year after year, is the entire explanation for the wealth gap that appears between them by 55. Lifestyle inflation is the mechanism that prevents high-income earners from building wealth. Lifestyle discipline is the mechanism that allows average income earners to build it instead. The sixth and final mechanism is starting earlier than feels necessary. The mathematics of compounding is front-loaded in ways that are genuinely counterintuitive until you see the numbers. A 25-year-old who invests $10,000 and never adds another dollar will, at 7% annual return, have around $140,000 by age 65. A 45-year-old who invests $10,000 and never adds another dollar will have around $39,000 by age 65. Same amount invested. The 25-year-old ends up with 3.5 times more simply by starting 20 years earlier. This is why the most important financial decision most Australians will ever make is not which stocks to pick or which suburb to buy in. It is when they start. Every year of delay is not just a year of missed contributions. It is a year of compounding removed from the end of a very long chain, where the end of the chain is where most of the value sits. Becoming a millionaire in Australia on an ordinary salary is not a matter of luck or special knowledge or connections. It is a matter of using the tools the system provides: super, franking credits, low-cost ETFs, property equity, consistently across enough time without letting lifestyle inflation absorb every pay rise along the way. The people doing it are not remarkable. Their habits are. If this gave you a clearer picture of what's actually possible, subscribe and hit the bell. Next video, I'm breaking down the exact investment structure most ordinary Australians should be using to build wealth efficiently from wherever they're starting. See you there.